Thank you to everyone for being here. My name is François Vigneault. I am a cartoonist and I'm also the marketing manager for Pow Pow Press, which is a publisher out of Quebec. And we publish books in both French and English. And today I am going to be giving a talk or a presentation about French comics in general, so Francophone comics. I'll definitely talk a little bit about Quebec comics for sure, because we are very blessed to have an amazing comic scene in Quebec and in Montreal. I will also just kind of generally talk about, bande dessinée and the background and history of those comics and that tradition of comics. I'm very, very happy to take any questions that you have and really honestly just discuss whatever you want. There's no structure to this. Initially, I thought I was going to be on a panel with other creators talking about French comics, and then at the end I realized I was doing a presentation. So I was like, okay, this is a brand new thing, so we'll do that. The slideshow that I have running behind me is just kind of not random, but it's sort of just images of French comics from the Franco-Belgian world and also a lot of Quebec comics. If you see anything on the screen you're like intrigued by it, let me know and I'd be happy to discuss it. I won't specifically be following anything because they're sort of in random order, just to give you something to look at, because otherwise you'd just be looking at me, which might be slightly boring. So maybe first off, what are people's relationships with French comics? Do people here read in French or in French and English both? Okay. So basically, probably I'm not going to tell you too much that you don't already know, but I will talk a little bit about it in a sort of generalized way for posterity's sake. In the French tradition, comics are called bande dessinée, which to mean like drawn strips, which is kind of interesting. It's not like comics or comic strips or comic books that we have in English. We have like this. Right from the start of the art form, we have this concept of like what the genre or what the structure of what's going to be in it is, and that's to say that it's going to be comics and comedy. In bande dessinée, there is instead like this sort of openness. It's just basically, it's something drawn. And I do think that even from the very start, you see that in the world of bande dessinée. It was less structured by certain genres than perhaps American comics were. This is all changing, of course. We are living through a remarkable transition in the world of graphic novels, and so graphic novels in the States and Anglophone Canada and everything are very much changing. You can kind of read any kind of story that you want. I think that happened earlier in French comics. There is more variety and a wider range of sort of genres that you might have. But there are definitely genres in the world of bande dessinée. And so probably a lot of you have read comics like Tintin, or Lucky Luke, or maybe the Smurfs even. There's like a lot of comic that are coming out of what is called the Franco-Belgian school, because not only in France, but also some of the most important creators were coming from Belgium, like Hergé, who has definitely had a remarkable effect on the world of comics, Asterix, those kind of comics. And there is a whole tradition in that world. There's like what we call Linkler is the world of Hergé. That's like this kind of like simplicity of line and clarity of movement in the comics. But there's also what you might see in a creator like Moebius, who is well known for, he did the L'Incal and lots of other comics. Airtight Garage was a designer on the never created Dune movie that Alejandro Jodorowsky was going to do. And so there's a wide range of stuff that's coming out. And if you ever have the chance to go to a festival like Angoulême in France, you will see that there's kind of everything there in some ways, but it was, I remember when I was growing up in the United States, I was like, oh, Angoulême, like that's gonna be the ultimate show, right? Like everything's gonna be amazing there. And I went, there's a ton of stuff, and there's a lot of amazing stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that I just couldn't care less about, because the industry there is just so vast, and the amount of things. So there's like lots of Western and cowboy comics, but there's also like lots of comics about airplanes, you know, like flying is like a whole genre. And then of course like science fiction books. And I'm a cartoonist myself. Sorry, I'll have to make sure I do this once in a while. I'm a cartoonist myself, and I remember, let's play that again. I don't know, I thought this was going to loop, but I think it might not, so I'll just go back to the beginning. And then we'll play. I'm a cartoonist myself, and I remember when I went to France, to Angoulême, people would pick up my book and they would I draw science fiction comics, and they would pick up my book and they'd be like, oh, like these drawings are really ugly. Because there's a whole culture of like an appreciation for the arts, and like there's a certain requirements and expectations. And that, I think, is happily changing. You know, in the 1990s and the early 2000s, there was a group called L'Association in France. That's creators like Louis Trondheim and David B. and later Marjane Satrapi and lots of other creators who kind of broke against that that album look, you know. And so if you've ever read a Tintin book or something like that, you might be familiar with the French album format, which is like 48 pages usually, like that kind of larger size hardcover. Was very kind of strict, and then that really kind of got broken in the 90s with L'Association and other kind of self-publishing people who were like, oh no, we're actually going to do different things. And then a similar sort of wave happened in Quebec also about that time, around that same time and a little bit after, where Quebec, you know, it had a tradition of, you know, like the Franco-Belge, like kind of funny comics, or you know, that album sort of format, and then that really got broken down, and people started doing all kinds of different work, which is quite rich and fertile. And one of the things that I've often noticed about Quebec comics is that there are strains of different traditions that are mixing and matching in that world. So there's the whole Franco-Belgian school and like the influence of those things, because many of the creators from Quebec they grew up reading the Smurfs or reading, you know, like Asterix or things like that. But the Quebec is so close to the rest of Canada, of course, and also to the United States. So a lot of those American comics kind of trickled through, like the superhero comics and things like that. And then also the sort of the graphic novel revolution that we've had in the last 20 years or so, like since maybe, you know, it goes back, you could make all kinds of claims about when it goes back, but, you know, Mouse and afterwards, that those kind of like stories really did kind of connect and energize with readers in the United States, and I think it also influenced Quebec creators as well, which I think that's one of the really interesting elements, is that you can see all kinds of different traditions going into the Quebec scene. Yeah, so I think that's one of the most interesting elements of what's going on with that. I'll give you just a kind of an overview of the Quebec scene, I guess, in some ways, in Montreal comics. I do think it's important that we as Canadians are like kind of crossing boundaries and like making these connections across cultures and things like that. There's this idea called the deux solitudes, like the two solitudes, which has like put like Franco Canadians in one box and Anglo-Canadians in another box. And I think that is finally breaking down, and I think many people are starting to understand that actually we have a lot of interesting strength by like this diversity that we have, Franco-Anglo, and then also like all the other languages and all the other communities that we have in this country. And definitely it's been part of what I want to do, is to try and like make those connections. You know, I think that building bridges between those communities is a good thing. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the Montreal scene, if I will. In fact, this part I might kind of like go through some little things. So let me see. I'll pause this, and I'll do view, enter, full screen. This way I'll be able to kind of give you a heads up about some of these. And I may have a mix of both French, Belgian, and Quebec comics in here. And this is by no means like, this is not everything. This is just all kinds of stuff though, but it might be interesting to just to visually see. One thing that I'll say right off the top that I think is really interesting about the Quebec scene is that at this point it is pretty much like a egalitarian as far as like women and men creators, which is very cool. It is like the publisher that I work for, I think we publish by far majority women, and it's not like, that's not like a mission statement that the company had. It wasn't like an idea we were like, oh, we're gonna do this. It just is, there's the culture and the development of the talent has like resulted in that there's as many, if not more, women doing comics as men in Quebec, which I think is really cool. I, for one, am happy to have my new overlords come and take over the comic book scene. So I'll talk kind of briefly about different comics as we go through, and I'll just go on different riffs. And as always, feel free to raise your hand if you have a question or if you want me to discuss anything more in detail. This is a page by a cartoonist named Julie Rochelot, who has done all kinds of different comics. She mostly works with other writers, but she did do a book called Betty Boob, which this is not from that, but was a very cool book about somebody dealing with a cancer diagnosis, and was an all-silent comic. It was really well done. Obviously a really cool visual stylist. And I think this is a really good example of, you can see like so many different traditions and vibes going on. And I think you'll probably see as we go through, there really is a lot of diversity of work. This is another Montreal cartoonist, Eloise Marseille. The company I work for, Pow Pow, was the publisher of her book, which is called in English, Naked, The Confessions of a Normal Woman. And very cool. She's a tattoo artist also in her everyday life. And this was her first book, so she came out the gate with a lot of, a very developed style. I love the weird way she draws people's noses, things like that. And then we are a publisher who publishes things in English and in French, and we're one of the very few that I know of that publishes both under the same roof. So we're trying our best to get this work out there, and I'm very glad to do that. There's also a lot of kids comics, of course, being published. One of the interesting things about Quebec is very, the Quebec readership and the people who are buying books are very proud, and they're really interested in local authors. And I actually hope this is something that, given the current kind of, how would you say, well, political and economic turmoil that we're kind of going through with our neighbor to the south, and I'm from the United States, so I apologize. You know, one thing I read recently is that, you know, in Quebec, 55% of the books that are bought and sold in the stores are from Quebec publishers. Anyone want to guess what the percentage in Canada, the rest of Canada is? It's 5%. So when I heard that number, I found that really shocking, and I really hope that, given that, you know, of course, things don't translate directly, and the economic realities are different in different places, but I do hope that Canadian readers, Canadian bookstores, and Canadian publishers start to realize that, like, it's not, it doesn't make sense for us to rely so much on the big five in the United States for our books and things like that. And I hope that, I feel like there's already like a kind of like a Buy Canada, Read Canada movement going on, and I hope that that really continues. And I think that Quebec could be a place to look to for the ways, some of the interesting ways to do that. Kids comics is big in Quebec. We'll come up with some other ones. This is Adventure Soar by Julien Parasorel. Really fun series that he is doing, and it's available in English as well. Very fun. And this, I think here you can kind of see the Franco-Belgian influence, right? Like if you ever have like read an old adventure comic, I think you can feel the vibe. And these are like big kind of albums. A creator from France, Riyad Satouf, not originally from France, but that's where he is become a really big star, the Arab of the future. Definitely a creator to watch out for, autobiographical work. And so that again is there's so many different kinds of stories and from different kinds of people than used to be being made, which is great to hear. Another French creator, David B. This is an autobiographical book about his relationship with his brother who has epilepsy. Very beautiful, difficult book, and a visual style is really interesting. one of the main creators with L'Association, and then also if you we'll come up with her work a little bit later, but was one of sort of a mentor for Marjan Satrapi, who is an Iranian creator who did Persepolis. So you probably can maybe see some connections between their styles. Another great album, this one is Beauty. This is created by, so Kerescoet is actually a pair of creators. It's a husband and wife duo who draw everything together, which is quite interesting. Just where I come up with at least one more pair. There's a strange, I don't think that there's many American or Anglo creators who do that kind of where both people are drawing, oftentimes there's somebody writing, somebody drawing. This is a very rare case, and but in France, there's quite a few, and I don't know how they work. I have no idea. I'm how do they do it? But they're both drawing on the page sometimes. Gorgeous book, really interesting, and the writer's Hubert. Cab, another Montreal creator. This is a very fun book if you'd like to kind of get the vibe of Montreal, and it's available in English. If you're an English reader, it's available from Oni Press. All about life in punks in Montreal and kind of gentrification and all those ups and downs in the city. So a cool book if you want to kind of get a vibe of what life in the city is like. And Cab is a very fun creator as well. I mentioned this earlier, Persepolis, and this was a big, huge breakout. Was made into a film and things like that. And I think this shows the vibrancy of French comics and also just the comic arts in general, in that all kinds of stories can be told now, and this can let us into histories that we might not have known about previously. This is Marjan Satrapi's story about growing up during the Iranian Revolution of '78 and eventually leaving. There are lots of fun genre comics too, so if you like things like adventures and fantasy comics and stuff like that, there's a lot to be gotten out in the Francophone world, either if you're reading in French or reading in English. This is Dungeon, which is a very fun fantasy adventure comic that was created by Joan Safar and Louis Trondheim, who are both quite important figures in the comics world. Then this particular volume, all the different volumes are drawn by different people. This volume was drawn by Boulet, who's another cartoonist we'll come back to a little bit later. So an excerpt, not extrait, from The Arab of the Future. And I think you can kind of get the feeling that this looks a little different. Everything is mixing now, right? All these different traditions are going back and forth, and we live in a much more international world. But I think even just by looking at this comic, you can kind of get a sense that it's a little different, right? It feels a little different than many of our American comics. But I think that there is sort of an international movement towards a much more indie kind of vibe. Lots of things, of course, important publishers like Drawn Quarterly, which is also out of Montreal, but is an Anglophone publisher, kind of give you a good sense of some of the different directions that goes in. A page from Persepolis. This is a recent book by, I believe, Philippe Gérard, if I remember his name correctly. This is a book about Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who's the author of The Little Prince, and some time that he spent in Quebec. So this is coming from one of the other publishers that is very important in Montreal, called La Pastèque. And La Pastèque is also, we'll come to it a little bit later, quite well known for publishing the Paul books by Michel Ravagliati. Vogue la Valise by Céris. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but sometimes there's a lot of French creators have one name. They're this is a tradition. I don't actually know where it came from. I'm not sure where the artist pen name of the single name, the semi-anonymous thing. But there's a lot. Cab, Caton, Céris. There's a lot of creators with just one name. This is a comic called Red Ketchup, another Quebec pair, and this is very much more in the old school tradition, but telling really ridiculous, funny, satirical stories using that kind of Linclair vibe. So that's kind of interesting to kind of play with that. Red Ketchup is sort of a absurd parody of like spies and like tough guys like Arnold Schwarzenegger type things. You'll see a cover from one of these books a little bit later. That's quite funny. This is from Vogue la Valise, which is a story that Céris did all about his youth, which was quite difficult. This was one of the good things too, is that more and more books that are available in French. Not everything is getting translated to English, but many things are. This is published in English by a publisher who you can find. Oh, I'm wearing their T-shirt today, Conundrum, where they're a great Canadian publisher out of Nova Scotia, and they publish quite a lot of French books into English. Another book from La Pastèque by Catherine Lapage. Some work from Pascal Girard, published by Drawn and Quarterly in English. And very much connected with also like the Montreal scene. His partner works for Drawn and Quarterly, and this is a comic where she's depicted in a fictitious murder mystery that's not real, but it all is presented as if it is. Another book from La Pastèque. And you can kind of see like the different strains, I think, maybe, you know, with like between like kind of like more punk rock edged sort of stuff, indie like shaky line, and then like this old school like that kind of clarity and style, you know, this old kind of style. And these are all like interacting and working within themselves, you know, like I don't think that there is, despite my experience of going to France and some people, not everyone, but some people thinking my work was too ugly, I think that there is more of an understanding that comics can be all kinds of different things, and bande dessinée can be all sorts of different stuff. Michel Rabagliati, probably if you are not familiar with Quebec comics and you would like to check it out for the first time, I think Michel would be a wonderful place to start. He did a sort of series of autofiction called the Paul series, and they're all about himself in many ways, and but through a fictional lens, following the same characters over time. He has a very fun style that we'll get to a page of his a little bit later. A fun style that connects with that old French style, but also has like this kind of scratchy punk element to it, which is very cool. I know he was an influence on how I draw. This is another one by Paul. This is a more recent book that he did where he did something a little bit different. It's actually not a comic, it's a prose novel that then has illustrations. I'm excited about this. It's coming out in the fall by Jimmy Susan. This is a Black Haitian creator who lives in Montreal, and it's about like a family migrating from Haiti. My own family comes from Haiti, so I'm really excited to see the story. And that also, I will say that in all honesty, probably there's not quite enough diversity in the creative world in Francophone Quebec right now. I don't think that there's like a lot of barriers being put up or anything like that, but I think that the creative culture is like being developed, and like more and more authors who are quite more diverse are going to be creating and have their books coming out. I think we're probably not where it could be yet, but I'm very excited to see Jimmy's work. I think it looks really cool. I got to read this book in preview just recently. Some work from Michel, and I think you can kind of see what I mean, like where there's like a kind of that clean style, but it's sort of weird and playful at the same time. Another creator, this is a Quebec creator who now lives in France, Guy Delisle, fantastic creator who's quite well known for some of his books like Pyongyang and Hostage. And then most recently he did a book about Edward Muybridge that's quite good. I would recommend all of those. So that's great to see him having his connect, like he is quite successful and is well known in France, which is wonderful. Another book from La Pastèque. This is a book by Michel Hellman and André Marois working together. La Pastèque is they do a lot of kids' books and kids' comics, and so that's probably one of the places that they're most well known for, but they still publish a lot of comics for adults, which is great to see. Another page by Michel. The Little Astronaut by Jean-Paul Ide, about his son who has some very severe disabilities, and then like his connection with like the world. Really beautiful book. I actually don't think this has been translated yet, and somebody should really get it out, because this is a sleeper. This is one that could be a hit. It was a big hit in the Quebec world. Red Ketchup I mentioned earlier. This is Agent Orange, and this is Red Ketchup versus Donald Trump. This is a book by Julie and her collaborator Sophie. This is that Rebecca book I mentioned earlier by Pascal. The Philippe book about Antoine Saint-Exupéry. Another book by Catherine. The Artist's Life. This is published in, I believe, in English by Conundrum also, by Catherine Oslo. And again, I think you can kind of see like the styles there, this is the kind of drawing that you would not have seen, maybe 10, 20 years ago in the comic book world. And now there's more diversity, more voices coming in. Tintin, of course. Not a bad place to start either, if you want to read the old stuff. But it's good to support these new artists, right, and these Quebec creators. Jimmy Beaulieu, very cool, very influential creator, and also under-translated. I think only a few of his books have been translated. By a show of hands, who here is comfortable reading comics in French? Almost everybody. Okay, great. And then if you're not, it's number one, there's a lot of books coming out in translation. And number two, I do think that comics are one of the best ways to do practice, because you have a kind of a interaction between the text and the image. I know for myself that I can read a book in French, but it's much easier for me to read a graphic novel than it is to read a novel. I find myself falling asleep sometimes reading a novel because it takes too much of my brain power. But some of Jimmy's work is available in English, and a lot of it is mostly available in French, but definitely a very cool and influential creator. One of the things that's interesting about him is that he was very influential through his workshops that he did. He sort of ran workshops where he taught his kind of style of cartooning, and many other creators in the Montreal scene went through his workshops. So there's like a kind of an interesting continuity. We're very lucky in Montreal. There is like a very good community that is very connected with each other. I will say that there is still some divisions between like the Anglo and the Franco sides, but I do think that those are crossing over, and more people are connecting with each other, and I think that almost everybody, to tell the truth, probably almost every French Canadian speaks like if you're, unless they're old, most of them speak and can read in English and things like that. I would say that a lot of Anglos like myself, I did make an effort, but we all need to make a try, because there's it could be helpful, and I would encourage everyone to do that. Another one by Isabelle Arsenault, cool kids comic from La Pastèque. Mile End, all about a wonderful neighborhood in Montreal called Mile End. And it was kind of interesting, these little strips that Michel was doing, and it ended up being almost like a trapped in amber portrait of the neighborhood as it was transitioning from like a working class neighborhood to a more gentrified. Now it's very, very gentrified. It's like the Williamsburg of Montreal. Violent Miserable. This is a movie now, and it is very funny. A very dark sense of humor. The book is best if you have a very dark sense of humor. The movie also. The movie is available on I think it's available on Amazon Prime in Canada. It's in French with subtitles, worth checking out. Again, that's like one of the fun things about the Montreal and Quebec world, is that there is a lot of interconnection between the different levels of the arts and things like that. So lots of things have been turned into, lots of these indie comics and stuff end up getting turned into movies. Like Paul has also been turned into a film and things like that, which can be sort of surprising, like many more than say American comics. The Pineapples of Wrath, which also was going to be turned into an animated movie or show, I'm not sure. This is by Cathon. We're the publisher of this one, Pow Pow. Very fun tiki stuff. Tiki mystery, murder mystery. Again, here's Naked, I mentioned by Eloise. And I think this is my last slide. Oh, almost my last. This will be coming out in English in the next year's Conquest of the Cosmos by Alexandre Fontaine-Rousseau and Francis Desharnais. Very fun comedy about the space race, and all done with extremely minimalist art. I don't think I pulled a slide for that, but all the interior is basically like repeated panels, and it's all about the pacing and the way the stories take place. Another Quebec creator, Mélanie. Something from another piece by Caton from her book, The Adventures of Scooby-Doo. Also, I've noticed the French comics are very, they're less averse to being sued. So they're like, they're willing to take chances on this stuff. Like I remember my book that I did in French, it has like all kinds of like song lyrics and things like that, and song titles and covers of stuff, and it was no problem. And then in English, the lawyers were like, wait, what? No, we can't do this. This is that book by Isabelle Arsenault, who also does beautiful children's books too. I highly recommend checking out her work, especially if you have kids. Oh, this is very small. This is something by Christophe Blaine. This is Notes. This is that cartoonist I mentioned, Boulet, and he's part of an interesting tradition of doing autobio and like online comics, like the blog, like kind of blogging, and he was one of the first people to really kind of get into it about 20 years ago. And then I recently worked on this book, which came out from an American publisher, and this was a collection of like the best of his first 3 years of his book. So that was kind of fun. I did like the translation, I did the lettering, and I did all the design and everything like that. So it was fun. It was good to see, you know, some of this older work getting out there. Something by Sophie Bedard, who's another one of our Pow Pow creators, very prolific. And she started with she started with a webcomic that she was doing when she was 18, 19 years old. And so she started having her comics published when she was 19, 20 years old from Pow Pow. She did a 4-volume series called Almost Summer in English. And then she did a book called Lonely Boys, this is from Lonely Boys. And then more recently she did a book called Maya and the Curse of the Shopping Center, which we have published in French, and I think we will publish in English as well. I think she has to decide if she wants to work with us or work with someone else, and we always will follow her wherever she wants to do. Something by Richard Suicide, all about, this is probably untranslatable. I think maybe this will never be translated because it has so much of this kind of like Montreal, Quebec argot slang in it. It's it would be quite a challenge, I think. So if you ever see this one, Chronique du Centre-Sud, grab it in French because I don't know how we'll get that one out in English. This is the cover. Sviane is another super prolific creator in the Montreal scene and very important to the scene. She recently, quote unquote, retired from comics to focus on animation. We'll see if she stays retired. This was her most recent, her last book, Football Fantasy. And this is another book by Sviane, and I think you can already see like kind of like the experimental nature of her work, you know, using collaging and different styles. Julie Delport is a French creator who immigrated to Montreal, I think maybe 12 years ago, something around that time. I think she's definitely a Quebec creator at this point, and I don't think she'll ever go back. Actually, I think, I mean, not to like be too controversial, but I think I could put her case as a good example of how, you know, different countries have different like cultural styles and vibes and things like that. And I would something I've noticed like as an outsider coming in is that like I'm coming from the States, and you know we're very like we're a weird mix of like PC and like authoritarian. Like we're really strange, and like we have like all this like cancel culture stuff and things like that. And then like there's less of that in Quebec, which I find I found a little bit refreshing. I was like, oh, people feel a little bit free to do whatever they want or whatever. And then but then it's funny, you go to France and they're like in the 50s or something like that. Like they're like really regressive, and like you know like I do a lot of like reading reports and like for publishers to see if they want to translate something, and I'll be like, wow, like this comics is amazing. but it's by a French person, and it's about like native stories here in Canada, and like it includes like like alcoholism and suicide, and it's like 16 third rails are being touched by it, and it's like an amazing book. I was crying. I was like, wow, what a good book. But like, and I was like, oh my god, like this totally should be translated, and yet like it's impossible because like France has a different culture, and then also there's like, in all honesty, it's like a more sexist culture than we have in Canada or in Quebec, and I think that there's quite a few like Julie, female creators who have immigrated and who feel more comfortable creating work in the scene in Quebec and Montreal. I think because it is. It's less of an old boys club. There's still elements of that, and then like there's some festivals where like the other day I was looking at. I won't name the festival, but there was a festival in a little town in Quebec. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll go to the show. And I was like looking. I was like, oh wow, there's like 45 guests, and 3 of them are women. And I was like, oh, that's weird, because I can understand that. Like 20 years ago, sure, like that's just the reality. Now it's like the easiest thing in the world for shows to be 50-50 or more. So I do think that I like that element of Quebec, and that maybe is a little bit of a difference. So if you start reading French comics, don't be too shocked that you might be surprised. You might be like, oh, okay. Another book by Samuel Quintin, who did Violin Miserable. And another thing I think that's quite cool in the Quebec culture is I noticed right away when I moved there is that I have a lot of friends, including myself, like that we work on a book for like so long, in the United States. And I have friends who have been working on the same book for 15 years, and the book's not done. And I don't even think it will be done, right? And then I remember when I got to Quebec, I looked around, I was like Samuel, Caton, all these other creators are like they just get work out, like they're just like getting books out, hundreds of pages are done. They don't worry about it, like they're not like trying to make everything perfect. They learn and grow as they go, and I think that that's actually a really cool lesson for all of us and all the things that we do, is just like get it out, like get the stuff out there. I'd like to say that I've completely learned this lesson, but I haven't. I'm still I'm still a little bit slow, but I try and be a little bit faster than I used to be. Iris, another one of these single name creators. We finally got to her, Julie. So this is Julie Doucet, one of the key figures in the Montreal comic book scene. These aren't in any particular order. I didn't put her at the back for any reason. Her book, Dirty Plot, was one of the most important, I think, comics of the alternative scene, and was the first comic book that Drawn and Quarterly was publishing as a book in English. Drawn and Quarterly, of course, has a very important relationship with the Franco scene, but also other Montreal and other Canadian creators, and now very, very international. And I was very happy. Julie recently won the Grand Prix at Angoulême, which that was well deserved. I had actually been stumping for it for a long time and telling everyone to vote for her, and I was really happy to see her win. Super influential, and she was really interesting. She's creating she I think shows that that background of Montreal where it's very bilingual. She herself was creating comics that were in French and English, even on the same page, and kind of going back and forth. Silent Comics by Tom. This is from Botanica Drama, and this is actually a very cool way to kind of get into Franco comics too. If you haven't read, if you don't read French comfortably, is to check out some silent comics. There are a lot of really cool ones where they're told without words. This is from an illustration from Dupuis and Berberin, who is another one of these, they both work individually, but it's weird, I don't know how they do it, but they draw together. So this is a drawing that they do together. I don't know how they do it. This is by Blanc, another book from Pow Pow. I love the radioactive colors. This is by David B. from Epileptic. You kind of see how it's just a very intense imagery, and it's kind of combining the very personal with all this historical imagery, things like that. And here's Julie also. Another page by Zvian. And a page by Luc Bosset, who is the founder of Pow Pow. He doesn't draw as much anymore. I think he hurt his hand and can't draw anymore, but he's a very talented creator too. Another page by Zvian. A huge comic in the kids scene in Quebec, Agent Jean by Alex A. Super, super popular. And again, that's like one of those things where I think we as Canadians all across the country can kind of like learn about, it's like, let's try and support our creators who are creating, locally and not always buy like the big American product. Another page by Dupuy Berberin. Tiny little page, way too small, from Carrascoët. One more from Zvian. And this is from The Jellyfish or La Méduse by Boom. Super beautiful book, really well done emotional storytelling, great queer romance also. This is where I'm really proud. We're the publisher of this in French and in English, and I tried really hard to get it noticed because that's my job. And it recently won an Eisner, won a Doug Wright Award for Best Comic, so it's I'm really happy that Boom is getting her. There's the Eisner right there.
It's going to be translated into Spanish.
Spanish and Italian, yeah. And something else by Carrascoët, that married couple who draws together. I don't know how they do it. It's a mystery. Another page from Vampire Cousins by Carton. And I have this book. I have this on the table. This is from Les Canaux de Satan, Satan's Canoes, which is a sequel to La Chasse Galerie, which is really, really fun. Thank you. And so I think that's like gives a kind of a generalized overview. I think that the scene is really vibrant, full of different kind of creators. I think there's something for everybody. One thing that happened actually is I have some of our French books with us, but our English books got lost in the post. So I have none of our English books, so I don't have very many books left. I just have a few French ones, but feel free to come and see me and we can chat. But now I'd love to open this up to questions from the audience, and I think there's a mic that can go around. And it can be a specific question or anything that you want to discuss or want me to talk about, because this is obviously very free-willing, but we've got a couple more minutes. Does anyone have a question?
Thank you. Okay. How hard is it for like a Québécois publisher like Pow Pow or something like that to sell in Europe, let's say France and Belgium? Is it difficult to get our comics out there in terms of distribution also, getting stores interested? Is it a really big challenge, or is it pretty...
That's a great question, and I do think it is quite a challenge. I think that we have, we at Pow Pow have been successful doing it, and other publishers like La Pastèque. Interestingly enough, there's actually, weirdly enough, a language barrier. And like some French like comic readers, they do not feel comfortable with the Quebec style of writing and like the way we say things, which actually I find sort of remarkable. And that's actually at Pow Pow we do books in both English and in French. And the origin story of that is actually like Luc was in France, and somebody was like, oh, like in French, all this was in French, but somebody was like, oh, you should translate your books into French, like French. And like that way they'll sell more in the French market. And Luc was like, oh, fuck that, like I'm not gonna do that. I'll do it in English. That makes sense. So I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but actually, like there is a sort of a hesitancy and a reticence. But I think that is also one of the things that's changing a lot. Pow Pow has been going to Angoulême since 2017, and I remember I was there in 2017 with my book, and it is kind of funny, like that people would be like, oh, like our little cousins from like the weird wild world of Canada, and like there's like a sort of like there's sort of an interesting fascination from the French market, and also a kind of like I don't know what the right word is, but like kind of looking down their nose at things. But I think now it's really sort of changing, and the books are becoming more and more successful, and I think people are they're getting away from that older style of thinking. But it's true that it's people who are there's certain people who are like not open-minded about everything, and they want everything to be in like a certain category. Or similarly, my job is trying to get the books into the American market, also a challenge, like getting people to care about like these books from a place that they maybe have never heard about or they don't know anything about. it's definitely a challenge. I do think that we are making strong inroads in that, and I think that my goal, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. In some ways, I really want people to think that Quebec comics are like the coolest comics in the world. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, yeah, well, Montreal is like the best comic book scene in the world. And am I exaggerating a little? Maybe a little bit, but honestly, not really. Like I lived in Portland, Oregon. I lived in San Francisco. I've like spent a lot of time in New York, and like, honestly, it's awesome. Like the amount of comics, the amount of creators in Montreal is remarkable. And in some ways, my goal is like for, you know, like how South Korea like managed to like convince the whole world over a long period of time that everything from South Korea was awesome, and like that we're all like watching Squid Game, and we're all like listening to BTS or whatever. And I'd like that for Quebec comics, and actually, if I can help, you know, Canadian comics in general to have that kind of like output into the world, that would be really cool too. But it's 100% totally a challenge. But I think we can maybe do it. We had another question?
Yeah, oh, that's a loud mic. In terms of comics, like francophone comics outside of Quebec that are Canadian, do you see, you know, like a burgeoning, I guess, world, or do you get exposed to them? Do they exist?
I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I have to say that I am not really aware of Franco-Canadian comics outside of Quebec. And it's not because I'm like turned off by it at all. Like I want to find out more. Somebody was just telling me about a Franco-Manitoban creator, and I'm gonna have to look up his work, but he's not here at the festival, so I'm gonna have to check out his work after. And I would love to meet more people and get to know more creators. I'm sure that there are, you know, as in so many ways, like the Franco communities outside of Quebec, being in a minority position, they face other challenges, you know, and for sure, like there is a tendency in Canadian culture, and I do it myself, to like we talk about Quebec as if it is all of French Canada. That is definitively not true. But I think that there are even there's even greater challenges. And I did get to go last time I was here. I got to go around St. Boniface a little bit more and kind of like try and like connect and check out some stuff. And I think I might have time to do that more tomorrow as well. And then every year when I go to shows like at TCAF, more and more I find that there are both Francophone and Anglophone interested like readers. And then here definitely I had that impression. I would love to meet more creators, and I would love to see their work getting out there. A lot of Franco creators who are working outside of Quebec also work in English. Like for instance, like Alison McCreesh, she lives in the Yukon, and her book is she wrote it in English because she is writing towards the audience that like in the cultural space that she's in, but she's Francophone herself. So yeah, or like there's a lot of creators out there, but they might be doing their work in English in much the way that people sing songs in English or something like that for that reason because of the market. But I hope that there will be more. And if anyone has any, you feel free to hit me up and let me know about them. Any other questions or thoughts about like things we can chat about? No? Sure. I don't see anyone beating down the door to get into the next panel, so I think we can take a minute.
I love comics that are done in two color comics, black line and maybe a blue or different. Is that a trend that's getting more popular, or how do you compare it to full color comics or just black and white comics?
Sure, and I mean this. I think I'll probably speak to it as an artist or a creator rather than in the grand scheme of French comics, because I work in that style myself, in like duotone or spot color. And for me, I think it was as a creator, I found like it was a good space where I could do a little bit more than I could do with just black and white. I could add certain elements to the art that would kind of create a different experience or an emotional experience, or sometimes little special effects in the art, but I wasn't being overwhelmed by working in full color. Like I do a lot of kids comics too, and those are in full color, and you know, it's fine, like it's a lot of fun, but I find that they're less like me and my voice. I feel like, you know, sometimes it turns into a weird giant rainbow, right? Like it's just like absolutely everything, and I feel that it's a nice space to have a little control. Definitely that is coming from a tradition of printing. You know, now everything is in full color and we see a lot of things on our screens and things like that, but definitely printing was originally a big limiting factor, and you can see it if you look at old comic strips or old newspapers and things like that, whereas this idea of, you know, you do black and then one more color, and then that is much less, that's much less costly than doing things in full color in CMYK. And so definitely I like older visual styles and things like that, and I think that that's always like wrapping back around into comics. And then, well, in the French case, in the Franco-Belgian case, like definitely there was like an idea that comics should always be in full color, and it was really with l'association. It's really weird to think that, you know, we've gone through such a change in my lifetime, but it's really with l'association in the 90s that comics started to be in black and white in France, which is, you're like, what? That's like, why weren't they always like that? But that was people rebelling against like the system and the structure that it had, that were supposed to be, and they were doing things in black and white or things with spot color and things like that. And also right now there is like artistically a trend with different kind of printing styles. Like risography is very popular, and so a lot of people are experimenting with like that limitation, and probably there is an interest in that kind of like tactile quality to the printing that you can kind of get with like that two color, because we're maybe inundated by full color stuff everywhere. So yeah, it speaks to me artistically. It probably is a trend and I don't even know. Yes. I love questions, thank you.
It's kind of a two-part question, and based on like the Belgian and French experience, I'm assuming that you pitched one of your books to a publisher in Europe, and they said that it was too ugly. I'm so fascinated by this because when I've had people from Europe review my work, they always say more backgrounds, more this, more, where I feel like compared to quite a lot of comics in Canada, my work is quite, no, I don't want to say intricate, but I think that there's more like stylistically compared, like, and I love more simple work. I'm an animator, so I guess, what was the note that you got back from publishers, and what do you think is the definitive style of like Canadian comics? Because I feel like European comics very specific, the States kind of specific, Japanese obviously very specific, or do you see that as still something that's forming?
That's a great question. Very complicated. Well, I was lucky when I got those people telling me that my book was not like detailed to the level that they wanted. My book was printed already, like it was published, because I was there as an artist with Pow Pow, and that was when I got picked up at Pow Pow. It was right after I moved to Montreal, and I had like a little zine, you know, the first issue of my comic, and we're gonna wrap it up after this question. And so I had this little zine, and it was like Luc got it through somebody, and he approached me about publishing it, which was great. So I'm lucky. I have worked with some European publishers, but I've mostly worked with Quebec publishers or publishers in the United States. And so I would say, you know, ignore a lot of the feedback in some ways, because like it's important to be yourself, right? Like, and like, you know, you can improve and do things right, but like you also shouldn't be like, oh, I'm gonna totally change my style to fit into the French mold. That's a bad thing. And then secondly, is there a definitive style? I think I can't say that there is. I really can't say that there's. I think that there's too many different influences. The art in Canadian comics in general, in Quebec comics, it's just all over the place. I think that the slideshow that we did kind of illustrates that. I would say that there's more of an indie vibe, and I think, you know, it's more indie than the US kind of thing. I think maybe publishers like Drawn and Quarterly, publishers like Pow Pow, these are very indicative of like a kind of like a earthy indie spirit that's in the comics. Like people like Julie Doucet are very important. But I think it's very diverse. It's still forming, and I actually think that there probably never will be a style. You know, because the diversity of views, the diversity of influences, it's enormous right now. All right, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it.